Hi, everybody. Today we are going to take a look at the range of federal COVID relief that has come down for kids since the pandemic started the public health emergency was declared in January of 2020. My name is Kylie Wheeler, and I am a project manager with the Children's Funding Project. We are a social impact organization that closes equity gaps in states and communities through strategic public financing initiatives. And what that has looked like in the past year or so is helping states and communities navigate the, in many cases, huge influxes of new funding that have come down through federal COVID relief packages. So we've spent a lot of time in the past year doing that in addition to our other strategic financing work and really blending those lines of work. So today we are just going to, again, this is going to be an overview of all of the federal relief, how much of it can be used for or has been used for children and youth. And really, though, what we're going to be focusing on is the American Rescue Plan and how the funding within it can be used by states and communities to better serve children, youth, and their families. So to kick it off, you see this timeline here. This just gives us all a sense of, since the public health emergency was declared, what's happened in terms of federal funding response. So we think, we tend to think of the CARES Act as being the first big federal funding package with, billions of dollars for children and youth, 57.4 billion. And then several other packages passed. We had the Coronavirus Response Relief and Supplemental Appropriations Act from this previous December that offered about 93 billion for kids. And then finally, and again, our focus for today, the American Rescue Plan Act, which was passed in March of this year and offered 210 billion for children and youth, which is, pretty unprecedented and mind-blowing. So, and then also I will direct you, there's a link at the bottom here to CFP's, what we call our emergency funding guide, but it is a comprehensive guide for states and communities to all of this federal funding. So everything that is represented on this timeline here, including information on the American Rescue Plan. So if you would like to dig deeper, I encourage you to check that out. So this is kind of a different view of the previous slide. What we see here across COVID packages. So between the Families First Coronavirus Response Act through the American Rescue Plan, the different individual funding streams that have received supplemental infusions of funds through these COVID packages. So not going to spend too much time here, but it's just worth noting that across the spectrum, from the general needs of children and youth to things like nutrition programs, there has been something for kids in each of these packages. We'll also highlight up top here, though, that what we have seen, or rather not seen, across these packages is targeted funding for the needs of older youth. And we have some suggestions for using funding in a way, the more flexible funding in a way that benefits that age group and their needs. So zooming in on the American Rescue Plan, what you see here is some examples of the comprehensive supports that it offers. There are highlights. Of course, we have the 39 billion in combined funding for childcare, the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, or ESSER 3. Those are the K-12 dollars that are pretty spectacular, and we'll get into why in just a moment. And then the other highlight would be under other important supports here would be the coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds. So direct relief for governments that can be used to support children and youth. So there's a lot here. So moving forward, we are going to walk through the 3 big pools of flexible COVID-specific funding in the American Rescue Plan. And those are new and supplemental childcare dollars, new education dollars in ESSER, and then finally the state and local direct relief through the coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds. So we're going to start here with childcare. And just to give you a sense of how childcare has been funded over the past year in terms of federal COVID relief, you can see that started with the CARES Act, which offered $3.5 billion in supplemental CCDBG, CCDF dollars. And then between the December package right here and the American Rescue Plan, we have a combined just about $50 billion in new support for childcare. And this is important because throughout the past year, advocates have been calling for $50 billion to save childcare. And we know that $50 billion is just a drop in the bucket when it comes to sustaining and improving the childcare system nationally, but it is a huge step forward. So a little bit on this $50 billion. We have to the left here, the Child Care and Development Fund flexible funding. Now, these dollars are truly supplementary. So they are going to go to your lead CCDF agency. And in general, they're going to be used and allocated however your state typically allocates its childcare subsidy money, with a few fewer requirements, including some income eligibility requirements are waived, as well as direct services spending requirements. So that's that. But what's really exciting is the column to the right here, the Child Care Stabilization funding. This is a brand new funding stream created by the American Rescue Plan. And it is intended as solely as a funding stream that offers or gives states the ability to offer grants to qualified childcare providers. Keeping doors open, helping them pay for, the increased cost of, safety measures, et cetera. But what we want to highlight are a couple of things that were recently released as part of guidance around the Child Care Stabilization Fund. So 90% of whatever your state lead agency receives as part of the Child Care Stabilization Fund must go to providers as subgrants. The other 10% is where things get interesting. These funds can be used for administration activities, childcare supply building activities, technical assistance. And the other thing that is significant about this is that there is explicit allowance in the guidance for states to be able to subgrant to intermediaries, backbone organizations, local, regional, childcare focused organizations to help administer these dollars efficiently, equitably, creatively. So administering them in a way that reflects the intermediaries' deep understanding of the community need in a way that maybe the state does not at this point. So it's a huge opportunity for local collaboration and regional collaboration. A few notes on timeline for these funds. You can see that the ARPA stabilization, so the child care stabilization dollars we were just talking about, must be obligated, or they must have been committed to a purpose and intended to be spent by the end of fiscal year 2022. So that's coming up really fast. Now, for the supplemental ARPA dollars, we are looking at a commit to spend deadline of the following year. So by September 30th, 2023. And then those funds must be spent by the end of federal fiscal year 2024. So there is some time, but this is definitely a crucial time to be making decisions. And then we have a few key considerations and potential partnerships here for the COVID-19 childcare dollars that I think we've touched on. So I'll just leave them up here for a moment, but I do want to highlight, there is an opportunity when we're talking about key partnerships for your local dedicated fund, your children's cabinet, any other youth-focused coordinating body in your community to get in on the administration of these funds. And then also, and for all of these funds, the flexible funds, the American Rescue Plan, be thinking about how you can use the childcare dollars, particularly the stabilization dollars, as seed money or a down payment on creative initiatives, pilots, because now is the time. All right, so moving on to the education dollars. So the Education Stabilization Fund houses roughly 3 sub-funds, including the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund, the Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund, and then finally the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund. These were all established by the CARES Act. They got their first cash infusions from the CARES Act. Each received another infusion in the December 2020 package. But what we're going to be focusing on today is this $122.8 billion that was infused into the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund 3, so ESSER 3 or ARPA ESSER. This money is it is a huge sum of money, but it is also very interesting how the federal government is encouraging states and localities to use it. So that's what we're going to get into next. So like I said, we have this $122.8 billion. Right off the top, $800 million of that goes to identifying and addressing youth homelessness. From there, state education agencies, so really state departments of education across states and territories, receive $122.2 billion. Now, by law, state education agencies are required to allocate 90% of that, so about $110 billion overall, to local education agencies or LEAs or school districts. So once school districts have received their money, they must spend, and you can see it in this box right here, they must spend at least 20% of whatever they receive from the state on evidence-based learning recovery. So that could include anything in the list you see in the bottom right here. But it is really unique. It's a unique requirement, and it offers a great deal of mandated flexibility to these funds. And we're gonna, on the next slide, we're gonna look at how that shakes out in your typical state, your typical school district. But real quick, we look over to the left here. So once the state education agency gives that 90% of their allocation to their school districts, they do get to keep 10%, which in total amounts to about $12.2 billion. Even this money has certain restrictions on it or prescriptive uses. 1% must be used for summer programming, 5% must be used for evidence-based learning recovery, and 1% must be used for after school. So there is money at the state level as well to address those very important out of school time and more wraparound needs. So what does this look like in an individual state, an individual school district? Now, I chose Virginia Beach City Schools in the state of Virginia because that's where I am currently located. So from ESSER 3 or ARPA ESSER, Virginia will be receiving $2.1 billion. That means that about 1.9 billion is going to go to Virginia school districts. Virginia Beach City Public Schools is receiving overall from the state 78.8 million. That means that Virginia Beach City Public Schools must spend 20% of that, so about 15 million, on learning recovery. So this is an interesting challenge for many school districts and many states for that matter, that are not necessarily used to managing large infusions of money, particularly for out of school time, learning recovery, things that can sometimes be afterthoughts because they are not necessarily part of the K-12 funding pipeline. So we're thinking really critically about how to support school districts, state agencies, local agencies as they try to get these dollars out the door quickly, efficiently, and equitably. So for a given student, what do these ESSER dollars mean? So on average, a school district is going to have about 3,300 in additional funding for each student that it serves. That means that for that student, the school district must spend about 550 on that student's learning recovery. And you can see below here, again, just some of the things that learning recovery can be. We definitely want to emphasize that this is not an exclusive list. There's a great deal of latitude in how one defines learning recovery. So it's an exciting opportunity for localities, for school districts to get creative in how they use these funds to support kids. Again, just some timeline points, ones to pay attention to. States must submit their state plan for these dollars by June 7th. And then you'll see here, these funds don't have to be committed to be spent until the end of federal fiscal year 2023. So between June 7th and September 30th, 2023, there is plenty of time to strategically plan to use these funds in the most impactful way. So you have a relatively long horizon for planning. And then again, just some key considerations and partnerships we alluded to briefly a couple slides ago, but does your school district have the capacity to manage this infusion of funding? And if not, are there partnerships, coordinating bodies, other organizations that may be able to support the school district to better administer the funds? And then keeping in mind, we just want to keep reminding folks that there is still money at the state level, even after that 90% goes to a state school districts, the state still has money. And it is important for communities, advocates at the community level rather, to ask about how these funds are going to be used and to offer potential solutions to their state education agencies. All right, finally, this is the last pool of very flexible funding. We're talking direct relief for states, tribes, territories, and local governments. Now, some of you might remember from the CARES Act, the Coronavirus Relief Fund. The Coronavirus Relief Fund was a direct relief program for state and local governments, as you might infer, and it had some pretty narrow guardrails on how funding was able to be spent. The eligible uses were really things that were directly related to the public health emergency. So there was that. And then there was also the fact that the funds originally had to be spent by December 30th, 2020 or December 31st, 2020. Which, that's not even a year to get these funds out the door. They did end up extending the spend by deadline to December 31st, 2021, but still So this is the precursor to the American Rescue Plan's direct relief. And we're going to talk in a second about why the American Rescue Plan's direct relief is way friendlier to states, communities, and how they are able to serve kids with it. However, do you want to give a shout out to the primarily counties, at least listed here across the United States, that made excellent cases for using the coronavirus relief funds for children. Specifically, I'd like to highlight Kent County, Michigan. So the administrator of their early childhood millage, or their local dedicated fund, First Steps Kent, was entrusted by the county, so Kent County, to administer $450,000 of its coronavirus relief fund allocation. And they used these dollars to coordinate the purchase and distribution of the resources that childcare providers needed across the county. And then another excellent example is in Whatcom County, Washington. Whatcom County, the city of Bellingham, and then it's small cities, so cities that may not have received a direct allocation from the coronavirus relief fund. They pooled their dollars, their coronavirus relief fund dollars, to set up a fantastic grant program for childcare providers. They ended up dispersing nearly 700,000 in grants, and I believe more in 2021 also. So all that to say, even with the narrow guardrails that were on these funds, communities across the country really knocked it out of the park in terms of making the case for kids. So the main focus of this section is the state and local coronavirus fiscal recovery funds. And you can see here just the overview of how much altogether counties, cities, non-entitlement units of government are going to, or will, in many cases, have received already, and their allocation method. But what's really great about these funds compared to the coronavirus relief funds is that the list of eligible uses is much, much more lax, honestly, and more forward thinking. So you can see here to the left, this is direct from the language of the American Rescue Plan, the eligible uses. And we include to the right here how a community might translate that into a child serving use. And then just in terms of timeline, these funds are, in addition to being highly flexible, they have a very long window to be spent. So by May 11th, 2022, every entity receiving a direct allocation from these funds or of these funds will have received all of their money. They must have a plan to spend, so they must commit to spend by December 31st, 2024. And then these funds don't have to be spent until December 31st, 2026, which leaves so much room for, really granular strategic planning and planning for the future. So it's just something to note. And then real quick, we just want to highlight some of the latest guidance around these funds. I adore the language in the interim final rule. It really gives you a sense of how the federal government is intending these dollars to be spent and how they're encouraging states and communities to approach administering the funds. So Treasury encourages recipients to consider funding uses that foster a strong, inclusive, and equitable recovery, especially uses with long-term benefits for health and economic outcomes. And then these are just a few of the most relevant parts or updates from the interim final rule. The one I will highlight is that childcare workers, school staff, and other care workers really are eligible for premium pay, so hazard pay, using these fiscal recovery fund dollars, which is something we were really pleased to see that they were explicitly listed. So again, some key considerations. As you're thinking about these funds, it is important to be aware of, or at least, generally aware of the type of budget shortfall that your state or community has faced because of COVID. And then attempt to weigh that against its estimated fiscal recovery fund allocation. For example, the city of San Francisco is highly reliant on tourism and taxes that come from tourism. And because of COVID, they ended up losing, they suffered an extreme budget shortfall. And it just so happened that their estimated fiscal recovery fund allocation just met that shortfall. So a place like San Francisco is going to have a little less latitude in how they're able to spend these funds. They might have to go directly to, replacing funding for government services, but that is so not true across the board. So it's just important to be aware of how those things shake out. And these are dollars that we are highly encouraging folks to think of as potential funding for programs and just the needs of older youth. And see, so a question we have been getting a lot is, what are we going to do when the dollars run out? Because they are limited funds. There is a fear that if you invest in a bunch of new programs, that, you do that, and then 4 years down the road, you have to get that money somewhere else because these funds have run out. And so we have a few suggestions, because this is a valid concern. And those would be to, 1, invest in administering infrastructure, 2, use funds as a down payment on things that will set a long-term precedent, 3, collaborate and coordinate across systems, and finally, document and communicate. What we mean by that, so in terms of funding administering infrastructure, you want to consider ways that you can fund intermediary organizations to coordinate the actual administration of this new funding, like we saw in Kent County with the CARES Act dollars. And then second, you can use that new money to actually fund the activities of intermediaries and backbone organizations that can help connect families to the resources that they need across sectors. Secondly, using funds as a down payment to set a long-term precedent. So treat some of these new dollars, maybe not all of them, as seed money for innovative pilot programs. And when we say innovative pilots, this does not mean, a brand new initiative that you created, in the past week, or something new you have to create. It can also mean, funding one of the, many plans that were made before COVID hit with this extra money. It does not mean innovating something new. The good work has already been done. This is the chance to fund it. Thirdly, collaborate and coordinate across systems. So this is a great opportunity to fund those partnerships across sectors that address the needs of the whole family. And that is an effective way to bolster the community as a whole beyond, a single use or line item of these dollars. Then finally, document and communicate. So you must be keeping a record of not only, how much did we receive, but how did we use it? Did we see outcomes related to the investments that we made? And even now, be thinking about your messaging strategy around, why these funds need to be replaced with some kind of new revenue. Why the programs that you funded are important. And thinking about that now will enable much easier case making, 4, 5, 6 years down the road. So that is what I have. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me at Kylie@childrensfundingproject.org. I am always here to answer questions and offer any feedback as I have it. So thank you.